Single most important part of any building is the foundation. The foundation is what holds up the entire building. Without the foundation, the entire building would collapse. More than that, if the foundation isn't good, it will fail over time. You see, there are two different kinds of foundations. One, the kind of foundation that is weak. The other is one that's strong. Some are weak, some are strong. So you may be asking yourself, why wouldn't you build every building on the best possible foundation? Simply put, it's harder. It's harder to build a good foundation. It takes more time and the materials cost more. With a simple foundation, it's really easy. You don't need to put in all that much effort to end up with a foundation that works. Actually, in perfect conditions, you would never be able to tell the difference between a weak foundation and a good one. Both buildings would work perfectly fine. But what about when conditions aren't perfect? In Matthew 5-7, Jesus gives what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Picture this. Jesus is on a mountain teaching the crowds of people of the words of God. God's word proclaimed to his people on a mountain. Ringing any bells? There are massive parallels between this and the law given to Moses on Sinai. The words of God given on a mountain, on a rock, to his people. Jesus concludes his sermon with an analogy. In this, he contrasts two different kinds of people. Those who put his words into practice and those who don't. He says that those who put his words into practice are like people who build their house on a rock. The people who do not put the words of Jesus into practice are like those who build their house on sand. That's how I see this person building his house on the sand in Jesus' analogy. I picture this guy just grabbing some posts, sticking them into the ground, grabbing some more planks, and very quickly and carelessly throwing the rest of his house together. Afterward, he's probably thinking to himself, hey, that was really easy, and maybe he does a little dance and parties it up. Meanwhile, there's this guy who is building his house on the rock. He looks at the guy who built his house on the sand and thinks to himself, man, that doesn't look too stable. So he builds his house on the rock. He takes great care in doing this. He puts back-breaking effort into building his house on the rock. When he is finished, he has a strong house and a firm foundation. Even though he had a firm foundation, I bet you he got a little jealous of the guy who built his house on the sand. He had a house that worked perfectly fine. Even more than that, it was so easy to put together. He didn't care at all about the poor foundation of his house because he was too busy living the life he wanted to, in the way he wanted to. And then the storm came. Both of the guys ran into their own home for shelter. Both held up for a little bit, but in no time at all, a flood rose up from the ground. Not long after that, the house built on the sand started to crumble. The foundation failed, and soon the whole house was swallowed up by the flood. After the storm had passed, the man who built his house on the rock was dry, and his house was still standing. The man who built his house on the sand, on the other hand, had lost everything. Building a house on a weak foundation is easy. Building your life on a weak foundation is easy. Choosing to believe only in the things that can benefit you while ignoring the things that take effort or might be difficult, this is really easy. More than that, when everything is going well in your life, when conditions seem perfect, this kind of foundation can work for a long time. But here's the catch. What happens when life isn't perfect? What about when conditions aren't perfect? What happens when life is no longer easy? What happens when you need to deal with issues like sickness, loneliness, failure, heartbreak, the end of a relationship, divorce, death? When your life is built on a weak foundation, on a foundation that you built to fit a convenient and comfortable lifestyle, you will not be able to stand up against these issues. When life is no longer easy, the foundation you have is everything. You know what though? There's hope. I love mentioning this part. There is hope. There's hope because God has given us a firm foundation. He promises us that if we build our life according to the words that He has given us, that our foundation will not fail, no matter how intense life gets. It won't fail because His word is perfect and because He never fails us. Building your life according to what Jesus says may not always be the most attractive thing, especially when other people are ignoring Jesus' words and still enjoying life. But listen to the analogy. It might take effort, and it might cost you a whole lot more than you expected. But a foundation built on the words of Christ will not fail you, no matter how big the flood.